All right, should we kick off the panel? Who's excited? Yes, who thinks music still has a drug and alcohol problem? Yeah, everybody. Okay, so the answer is yes. So that's the end of the panel. You can go and get more coffee. No, let me introduce you to our speakers. First up, on the screen, we've got Sahara Shepherd. Now, she used to be the engine of the Big Day Out, and she was a massive booze hound, and she's been sober for 8.5 years and is now a tour director, just recently did Midnight Oil. Please welcome Sahara.
Hey Yumi, my surname is Herald, Herald.
Ali Barter is next to Sahara, musician, sober 10 years. Please welcome Ali. Caleb Williams is Senior Artist Manager at Unified Music Group, has been a musician, has been a tour manager and has been a pisshead as well. Please welcome Caleb. And Dr. Jeff Crabtree here just got his doctorate, did a PhD in workplace and sexual harassment in the music industry. If it happened in music, he knows about it. Please welcome Dr. Jeff. Okay, so I want to start with Ali, if that's okay. Grab your mics. You're all going to be talking. Don't be shy. Ali, the question about the music industry and sobriety is kind of moot. We know that there is a problem. In your 10 years of experience, what have you seen change?
Well, I came into my music career as a sober person. So I have been sober my entire music career, and I have found it not difficult to be sober with a lot of I have outside help with my sobriety. So in terms of what I've seen change, personally, I do manage my sobriety with something with outside help. I'm part of a 12-step fellowship. But I guess there's more conversation around it. There's more visibility for people who are sober. I hear about it more. I heard about it less when I first came in. I was looking around for those other people who weren't drinking, and now there are more people who aren't drinking. I still think that, in music, you're in bars, clubs, festival areas, backstage areas. There's drugs and alcohol everywhere. But I also think it's a cultural thing. Australia is like that too. So, yeah.
Caleb, can you paint us a picture? You've worked as a tour manager. You're still managing bands now. What's it like when a band arrives to play a show? How does it look for those people?
Well, they basically just walk straight into a room full of enough alcohol to kill a small horse. And they drink it. A lot of them, yeah. The first question, if it's not there, is where's our rider?
Right. So they've come to expect there to be a big square tub full of ice, chockers with alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so if you're a young band and you're like, this is new for me, we're in the band, oh my God, or they're the crew or the friends, there's a bit of a feeling of Disneyland for alcoholics, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. And I think you get... with the bands, the bigger they get, the friends come along with it as well, and it's expected. So it's expected that you're going to drink with your friends. And it's end of the day, it is a workplace. And there's no other workplace like it, really.
Sahara, we've heard about what it's like for bands, but you were never the band. You were always the person kind of making stuff happen behind the scenes. What's it like for somebody in your position, all that unfettered access and the enablers that are attracted to the industry?
Can you hear me okay, Yumi?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Look, I really relate to what Caleb just said about, like bands turning up and, the rider's either there or they're asking, where is it? And it's funny, that used to be very... kind of almost part of the allure. I didn't start working in the music industry, because of easy access to alcohol, etc. But, did it seem like it was an added bonus? Sure. And it was so readily accepted as well, and I think sometimes the thing that's forgotten in this conversation is that, a festival, a gig, etc., it's actually a workplace. It's a place of work where there's a duty of care, and there's should be guidelines about OH&S, etc. Like if I was working at the tax department as an accountant, would it be acceptable for me to be drinking during the day or etc.? No, of course not. But somehow in our industry, those lines are very blurred. And it certainly, I like Ali, have outside help. I utilize a 12-step program that supports my sobriety, and it's certainly my experience that there's a lot of people in the arts within that as well that have found their way to sobriety after finding their work situation very challenging.
I'm really interested in what you've got to say about that, Sahara, because I think we know that musicians are expected to get on stage and swagger and show off, and that can sometimes be about being loose and louche, having this front of bad living, But it also exists within the microcosms of people that surround the musicians. So you're one of those, Sahara. Did you feel that you had permission to drink and to be sloppy at work?
Not necessarily sloppy, but certainly had permission to drink at work. And there was certainly at times an expectation, that it was all, I mean, most of I used to, I was the national event coordinator on the Big Day Out for 18 years. Part of my job was to host after parties, etc., which Yumi will recall well, went for days, some of them, But, beyond those big event moments, was there alcohol in the workplace? Absolutely. And that was not, unique to that office situation. It was, generally across, a lot of businesses within the industry. And I think I would hope some of that is changing to some degree. Yumi and Jeff and I were, in Brisbane last week for the Almas, and there was a, really heart-wrenching but very interesting panel with, some women that have, had pretty toxic workplace situations. Some of them not just toxic, absolutely criminal. And Yumi, you'll remember every single one of those panels that day, alcohol was a subject. Or a topic that came up in those conversations. And I think what's changing is that, years ago when I first started in the industry, 35 years ago, it was a lot looser just in structure. Like we didn't have an HR department back then. Who was I going to, reach out to for help? Me. There was nowhere really for me to turn to. I mean, I think one of the things that's changing around that expectation is that a lot of these conversations are now becoming more public. Whereas for me, it was when I was struggling, it was really easy for me to hide it because it just looked like part of the party. And I guess to put in context, I'd be drinking at the party, hosting the party, and then I would still go back to the hotel room and continue drinking on my own.
Right.
And that's not really a party, is it?
No. And I know that hitting rock bottom looks different for different people. Dr. Jeff's research is very interesting in that it helps shine a light on what alcohol can do to workplace safety issues, particularly for women practitioners in this business. Can you tell us what your research revealed?
Yeah, it's absolutely a factor. So because the music industry is a party space, basically, the work that people do in music, when you're working live, everyone else is partying. The audience is partying. The audience are there to have a good time. In fact, a lot of the venues that musicians and artists work in, the smaller venues, the licensed premises, and so in essence, the musicians are there to sell the alcohol in part. So there's this sort of really difficult, intertwined, conjoined relationship between the alcohol industry and the music industry at that level, certainly. And then at the upper levels, more upper levels of the industry, the after parties that Sahara was talking about, that's another party space. And so what you actually have is alcohol reduces your inhibition, and it impairs your judgment and impairs your ability to function. So the 0.05, I hate to get technical, but the 0.05 limit that we have for driving is equivalent to going without sleep for 17 hours. So what they're basically saying is once you have 0.05, it's like you've gone without sleep for 17 hours in terms of your ability to react and judge. And how we go well and truly beyond 0.05 in most after parties and most events and things like that. So what's actually happening is inhibition disappears, judgment is lost, and then this is a recipe for toxic behaviour. It's a recipe for powerful men. This is my research, right? So it's a recipe for powerful men to make unwanted sexual approaches to women in the industry, perhaps women who work for them or women who work alongside those who work for them, and then they can use the alcohol intoxication as an excuse later on. So I've got plenty of reports where women talked about their experience of being harassed, and then it comes back to, the guy came and saw me the next day and said, I apologise. But the damage there is already done. And then the culture is already set. And in that kind of party space, you've got these moments where, this was reported so widely, it's almost like an independent phenomenon where women we in the after parties or the post-launch events, and then a senior guy comes up and says hello to everybody in the room, and his hand is on her back but lower down than is comfortable, and then it sort of stays there a little bit longer. In fact, all my participants kept referring to it as the hand on the lower back thing.
Really?
They had the same language.
Yeah.
So all of these women had the same language, hand on the lower back, and then they were saying things like, the thing is, if you're not in the industry, or if you were just looking at that situation without being in the situation, you go, these people are friends. But it's what's going on is the woman knows this isn't a friendly thing. The woman knows there's a sexual advance being made, and then the alcohol, I think, is a huge factor in allowing that to take place. I think it's a huge factor in the environment where anything goes.
Well, there's a power imbalance there too, isn't there?
I didn't want to go there. We're just talking about alcohol, but
Yeah.
power imbalance. So alcohol is fueling behaviour that occurs primarily because of the power imbalance. And I was sort of so privileged to hear Aurora's research. So if you're in that first session, that was just like a brilliant piece of research. In fact, I took the opportunity to grab as soon as she walked off stage and get email address, right? Because I want access to all that stuff. She pointed out that power imbalance is at the heart of all of this. There are massive power imbalances in the music industry. All harassment, whether it's sexual or bullying, occurs because there is a power imbalance. And so when you put alcohol in there, what that does is make the power imbalance easier to exercise.
One of the things that I like about Sahara, having Sahara, Caleb and I here, is that we had to get sober during our tenure within the music industry, whereas Ali, you knew to get sober, and it was within that space of empowerment, I guess, and intentionality. It's a pretty wanky word, that you found your way into the music industry and built your career. So do you feel like, Ali, you were armed against things like sexual harassment and power imbalances when you started out?
Yeah, well, I came into music the year I got sober in 2012, and I was very aware that nothing good had happened for me while I was drinking, and now music was happening, and if I drank, it would all go away. So I was very, this is business, not mucking around time, and I felt, I had to make up for lost time, so I was very focused on just going, playing a gig and getting out of there. And so I really didn't put myself in those positions, and I didn't have to because I had good management who knew that I was sober and did that stuff for me. I didn't go to the parties, I didn't do anything, so I wasn't there. But I definitely had experienced power imbalances in hospitality, another industry which is rife with drugs and alcohol, and I'd learnt some lessons there before I came into music. So that's my experience of it.
Caleb, one thing you said to me when we were talking the other day was a young band can go on tour and within that one tour they've turned into alcoholics. Can you explain?
Well, I just think, especially if they're doing larger tours, regional tours of Australia, where you're doing multiple weeks of, 5 nights a week. All of a sudden you're drinking 5 nights a week because someone's giving you free alcohol 5 nights a week. Then you get home, and I know this is basically what happened to me, was you get home and all of a sudden you just realise I've just kept going. And it's hard to stop. It's really hard to stop.
So you get home from tour and you're kind of itching for a drink?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it literally takes one tour. I've seen it happen. And even worse is when you're in a tour bus overseas.
Yeah, tell us about what's that environment like being on a tour bus?
Well, you're in the venue, there's free alcohol in the venue, and anything that doesn't get drunk for the rest of the tour ends up on the bus. So it's just constant alcohol. And that's for the crew as well, because it's just a hotel on wheels, basically.
Yeah, and it's getting topped up day after day.
Every day, yeah.
Sahara, can I ask you about the business model here? Because it does seem, and I've seen enough band rooms and writers to kind of go, wow, like I never see a bottle of Smirnoff that big in real life. And yet here I am and it's free. Like it's kind of like, it is sexy. It's like, wow, look at this fat bottle. I'm going to nurse it like a baby. I'm going to breastfeed this Smirnoff. The business model question is, do venues and tour promoters kind of like augment what they pay a band with this sense of a bonanza of alcohol that they get cheap but is sold at a huge markup?
It's funny, over the years, I've seen every level of rider, from some of I've worked with everyone from, Metallica, down to, little indie bands that, haven't played outside of Sydney. And they all have a rider, it's very important to get their rider. And, and some of those are kind of obscene. There's riders I've seen over the years that, as I think Caleb said, there's so much alcohol on there. If it was drunk, even by everyone in the band, they would all have alcohol poisoning. Or they certainly wouldn't be able to function in a healthy way. They would be drunk at work. But, as per a business model, there's an expectation that the promoter is providing the rider, and that can differ depending on what level of artist that is. Say for someone playing at a small little local venue, the venue would usually, throw in the slab of beer and some soft drinks or whatever that might be. But when you're talking
I'm just going to interrupt. Something in your hands is right near your laptop mic, and it's creating a lot of audio interference.
That would be my jewels, Yumi.
Ladies and their jewels. Sorry, please continue.
Okay, I was just saying, is that better?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, on an international level, some of those riders that come through, we get charged for them. It might look like, oh, it's all laid on and it's free, but it will be part of the catering bill. And some of those bills that we have are excessively high and will be factored in as a tour cost to the budget right from the beginning. So while it kind of looks like it's free, it's smoke and mirrors. It's an illusion. And, certainly, at a large venue that we'd be playing, just say, for example, Kudos Bank Arena, that would be part of our catering bill that we would get from the venue. And it ain't cheap. There's not particularly discounts there, etc. We're paying, we're not necessarily paying retail for it, but it's, still quite costly. And, there's been shows that I've had where the catering bill is, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
So that's
not all on alcohol. That's the food as well. But
yeah. But I'm finding that really interesting because I always sort of had this illusory idea that everybody kind of got it a little cheaper and that's why it was passed. It was one of the few benefits that was passed on to the performer, but that's not true. Someone's paying.
Oh, someone's always paying.
Someone's always paying.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
just-
the only time that might be slightly different if there's, a beer sponsor or something on an event or a festival, they might be, supplying stock either free or at kind of at lowered rates. But on a standard gig where there's not an alcohol sponsor involved, you're paying for it. It may not seem like it's like the band doesn't actually necessarily see that bill with it. They think it's kind of, all put on for free. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think that's deliberate. I think that's by choice that the band thinks it's free. Do you remember? I think it was Justin Timberlake did a tour called "I'm Loving It." It was the McDonald's tour. It was like, you sell out. But I really think that's where a lot of the music industry was headed for a while. That you had to be sponsored by icy cold cans of Coke or Strongbow or Jack Daniels or something. It seemed like there was no way that a tour could absorb all these expenses without an alcohol sponsor. Sahara, is that changing?
Yeah, and look, it comes down to, I've got artists that I work with that they don't want anything to do with a sponsor. They see it either as a sellout or in some ways unethical. But then you've got, if you look back at particularly festival scenarios, where if you use Big Day Out as an example, that we had several alcohol sponsors on board, as well as multiple other, sponsors, Converse and, etc. The income that you get from that offsets things that people don't necessarily pay a ticket price for. Using that as an example, Yumi, did you love having the lily pad at the Big Day Out?
Fucking love the
Sure, love it. But, is someone going to pay $150 ticket price or more to see the lily pad? Probably not. So how do we subsidise art on site? It was through sponsorship deals. But the expectation from those deals is that those brands, no matter whether it's alcohol or not, but particularly alcohol, they want real estate. They want some type of presence on site, and therefore they're buying into the festival brand, which in turn, has the artist brand attached to it. So they're buying cool. They're buying the audience. They're buying coolness by association.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and it happens at all levels. Getting access to people, and Caleb, have you found that people with drugs who aren't necessarily part of the music scene want to leverage their little baggie to get access to that cool?
Yeah, totally.
Totally.
Happens all the time.
So tell me, what's the scenario where that exists? Can you help us to understand it?
Usually I've found that it's either a friend of a friend that has, most of the time it's a friend of a friend, because you don't really just want random people giving you drugs. But that does happen as well, especially with pot.
Right.
I've found if the band is very outspoken that they smoke weed, just gets thrown on stage.
Like underpants.
Yeah, exactly.
So they get access by saying, I've seen this myself, so I'm asking you a question I already know the answer to, but, if somebody's got drugs, and everybody wants drugs, and drugs are expensive, that's how they kind of get their in. So suddenly there's a band who has access to free drugs.
Yeah, free alcohol, free drugs.
Alcohol, free drugs.
Yeah, and lots of the time, if the band's big enough, then tour manager, and I know, I'll admit it, I've had to go and get drugs for many bands over the years. If that person likes the band, they'll say, "Oh, can I come to the show?" And then, yeah, it's on for young and old.
Right, the tap's sort of turned up a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ali, do you see a lot of that? Given your care around your sobriety, do you still see that when you play a show?
No, I'm very cared for, and I leave. Why am I there? I didn't get sober to learn how to be around drugs and alcohol, so my life has a different meaning and a different purpose. And I know that's very different to what's being spoken about on stage, but I'm a sober person in the music industry, and that's been my experience. I had a song called Cigarette. People used to throw cigarettes at me. So I suppose if I wrote a song called Bag of Coke, maybe they would have thrown Coke at me. But I don't, and I sing about being not being sober, but my experience of being an alcoholic. And so I'm very open about it. And my management, I often get offered mocktails and stuff like that because I'm not ashamed of it. It's part of my life. It's who I am, and it's something I want to keep, my sobriety, and so I share it. And therefore, I've set up things around me to make sure that I'm okay. And I leave. Like, why? I don't want to be there while people are getting sloppy and drunk. That's boring. I've done that. I did that for 10 years and it didn't do anything good for me, so I leave. But that's my, as Sahara and I've said, I have outside support for that.
Interesting to talk with you, Dr. Jeff, after Dr. Aurora's research was unpacked this morning. I really found that so fascinating. Half of the respondents have resorted to drugs or alcohol to help with the stresses of life over the last 2 years. So it's been a really rough time for people who practice in the music industry, whatever roles they have. Dr. Jeff, what did you take from that?
Yeah, I looked at that with great interest. Look, could I talk about these vulnerabilities that creative people have?
Please.
There's a slide, guys. There it is. This is a sort of a summary of a breadth of research in the field of psychology. Highly creative thinkers, and so many people in the music industry are that. Whether not just performers, this is people in the tech crew, people in production, people in management, people in leadership, attracted to the creative industries. Highly creatives share these 6, what psychologists refer to as vulnerabilities, but 6, I guess, things that make them interact and engage with the world differently. The first one is this thing called divergent thinking, which we think of as fluid thought, which is this ability to make unique connections between things that other people wouldn't. It's as if they're looking at the night sky and making new constellations, And then the next thing is this, what psychologists refer to as greater openness to experience. It literally means that creative people are high risk takers. So people who have these creative propensity are naturally high risk takers. And you put them in, obviously, in a situation like where they can take lots of risk, then they'll take it because that's their propensity. And then the next thing is they have this quality called skinlessness, which we talked about on the phone, which is psychologists refer to as low latent inhibition.
Can I just repeat it? Skinlessness. So not having I guess the opposite of being thick-skinned.
Yeah, it's like living life with one layer of skin missing. And it means that highly creative people are taking in more sensory information. They're more, when they're focused they're more astutely aware of what's going on. A lot of that's empathy. A lot of songwriters, for example, are really high in this kind of empathy, which links to the next thing, what psychologists refer to as neurosis, which is better off thought of as a sort of a roller coaster of emotion. High emotion, low emotion, high empathy, low empathy. So it's like up and then down and then up and then down. And that's a big thing. The skinlessness is extraordinary because you can be just completely overwhelmed and feel like, wow, your mind's going crazy. Then the next one is highly creative people are impulsively non-conformist. That is, they have this impulsive desire to not actually conform to what's going on around them. And then the other thing is they have a quality called the resistance. These psychological terms are incredible. Sounds like you're on an operating table and you're listening to the surgeons talk their talk. Resistance to premature closure, which means you and I, everybody here, we're okay with ambiguity. It's like we don't necessarily need to have a solid answer. In fact, to be honest, apart from my PhD research, I love not having an answer. In fact, the fact that things are in tension or in opposition and paradox really interests me, my creative brain. So these 6 qualities are highly associated with creativity, all from separate studies. And the reason we know this is because psychologists, whose job basically is to study mental health, and the big money in psychology is in people who have mental health issues. So what they do is they'll study people with mental health issues, and then they'll go, oh, these things are the problem. And they'll start, and we've got this one here, this skinlessness thing. And then they all go, oh, yes, but we recognise that it's also associated with creativity. But nobody's ever put them together before. So if you put them together like this, suddenly you will have a cluster of qualities that may look to people like you're mentally unwell, but you're not, you're just creative. Because these 6 things are also as if a person who has these qualities is like they are finely tuned to be able to access the creative process really easily. So you experience something, and then, so you're a songwriter, you experience something, and then you write a song because that experience comes inside of you and hits you in a way that it doesn't hit normal people. They still have the experience, but they don't write songs about it.
Can I ask you, Caleb and Sahara, do these traits resonate for you as well?
You want to go, Caleb?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think so. Definitely. Managing artists and stuff, you've got to be creative.
Creative, yeah.
Yeah, you have to. You're across so much of not just the person's life, but not just their band or their artistic life. The relationship with an artist and a manager is pretty tight. You have to get along, and you have to follow their creative direction, and that takes some creativity. Yeah.
Sahara, running something like the Big Day Out, you're obviously a creative person. Are those traits something you recognise in yourself?
I'm the first to admit I have no musical talent at all, but I do give good festival. Yeah, absolutely. And I think even, I'm really good at logistics. That's essentially what I do. I make things happen. But, that means that I have to have a brain that's, really agile. And, there's lots of different levels of creativity within that. And as Caleb said, working with people that have a very visible creative output takes a lot of creativity behind the scenes, as well as management of that as well. So it's kind of can be a real fine balance. I think one of the things for me, where my story started to go downhill and was that, I was so busy propping up other people and the show, etc., and literally keeping the show running. And I was carrying a really significant trauma that I never got the chance. My eldest daughter, died, and then we had a death at the Big Day Out show 3 months later. And, I went back to work the day after my daughter's funeral. And I think about that in hindsight now, and that's horrific. But there was no, and the show will go on. We just kept going. I kept going. But the way that I was working was not sustainable. So drugs and alcohol for me were propping me up. They were a way of, maintaining the way that I was working. And I had no boundaries around my work. All those lines were really blurred. Ali spoke earlier about, her experience, which has been, thankfully for her, very different to mine. That, she came into this industry sober. But one of the things that she spoke about was really about having those boundaries. And when, I don't stay to the end of the show anymore. I'm gone. My job, the part that I'm responsible for is done. So I've got no reason to be staying on, You saw me the other night at the Orma Awards, Yumi, which was a lovely, glorious night for me. I won a big award. Yay. That can be really dangerous. It's not just necessarily the lows in your journey and those rock bottoms, the highs can be just as dangerous as well. They can seem really attractive. But, I have, like Ali said, I've got a really great support network around me, but I have really, strong boundaries for myself. I have a really good exit strategy. I was gone. My part here is done. And, if I'm hanging around for something else, then, I'm making a choice to potentially put myself in danger. But it's also to what purpose? You know, is it ego? You know, I want to hang out with the band. You know, that's thankfully for me long gone these days, but, you know, certainly, you know, maybe in years gone past, that was part of it. You know, it was alluring and glamorous, you know, on the surface, but underneath it was pretty grubby.
Maturity is a big factor, isn't it, in figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And we definitely want to talk about coping strategies and what you can change in your work environment to set you up to stay sober if that's what you need. Just one thing I wanted to point out. I love that you're here because I know some of you do perform, but I know a lot of you don't. You're here in the music industry as long-term industry practitioners. One thing that makes me laugh is, you know, I used to go to the ARIA Awards every year and presented a few times giving out awards, and the musicians think that they're there for life, but they're not. They're washing through. They're yesterday's heroes, you know. The people who are there for life are people like the practitioners, the record industry people, the tour managers. They are lifers in the music industry. But what they share with people like me and people like Ali, people who take the stage, is that at some point in their young lives, usually when they're young, they went and saw a band or a singer and they had a transformative experience as a fan. They got their hair stood on end and crackled. Their nipples went erect. Their wombs contracted. A whole DNA transformation happens to people like us. And I think this is what we have in common, is that we're fucking fans of music deep down. And that's what keeps us coming back to go to work day after day. It's the exhilaration that you get when someone makes transcendental art and we get to be part of it. So that is a glorious drug that we're allowed to have and we can have safely. It's the other drugs around it that can create real danger for us. Ali, I want to go to you. When did you know that the other drugs, not the elation, not the joy of performing, the other ones were bad for you?
I think I always knew. The first time I got drunk when I was 15, I woke up in Sandringham Hospital and I had my stomach pumped. And that's how I drank. And I drank to blackout always and use drugs to sober up and drink more. And but it was when I was about 23 that I realised that I actually felt bad. It wasn't just alcohol that made me do bad things, that in myself I woke up every day with what I call, and I've heard other people call, a sense of impending doom. And I just felt bad all the time, even if I hadn't drunk. And that was about 23. And, you know, I had the experience of seeing all my friends move on with their lives and get degrees and have relationships, and I couldn't be happy with anything. I sang as a kid. I gave that up. I dropped out of numerous degrees. I was, you know, unfaithful in blackout to my boyfriend over and over again. Couldn't understand why. And you know, when I was 24, I started my journey with a 12-step program and getting sober. I got sober when I was 26, but I started to sort of control my drinking around 22, 23. But I always knew, like it was always that way for me.
What kicked it into the real world that you could actually get sober?
My dad died when I was 24, and I think life became really real for me. And then I was just miserable. And I've always been someone, as those things are all listed on the wall. Like, I'm very introspective and I think a lot about things, and I wanted to know why I was behaving this way. And so my life at that point had become living on my couch watching DVDs, because there was no Netflix then, and I was watching Dexter, and in Dexter he goes to AA, and so I went to AA. That's how I found out about AA. And I went for a while, and then I decided that I wasn't really an alcoholic and that I was just my dad had just died and I had a rough trot, and so I went back out into the world. Didn't really drink again, but I was terrified of what would happen if I did drink, and that's what kept me sober. And what I experienced in that year until I came back to the 12-step program, AA, is I was a dry drunk. And so all these feelings that I had as a kid that I soothed with alcohol, when I stopped using alcohol, all those feelings were there. All this, when you said skinlessness, I was like, oh God, you know, like that. I am a skinless person and I need something else to manage that. And being a musician is a really hard and weird job. And I have only done it sober. And I am grateful that I've had a lot of outside help, because there's a lot of comparison, there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of resentment, there's a lot of fear. And I cried after many, many gigs because I knew I couldn't drink. I knew that wasn't the answer. I cried, I felt bad, I wanted to quit. I still feel like that. I still feel like that a lot, you know, after gigs. And so, but I have someone I can call. You know, I have people in the 12-step program. I have friends. I write about how I feel. I put it into my songs. But it's hard. And I think, like yes, we need to talk about the problems that alcohol, that there is alcohol present and all that. But we also, I would love there to be more support for people who are trying to live sober, and talk about the mental health side of being a musician and being on the road, and how to it's hard, it's really lonely and scary, and I often felt like I had no one to talk to, you know. Even my other friends, you know, who are sober, they didn't do music, and I would say music's really hard and weird, and some people would say, yeah, I just don't get it, and some people would be like, it's just a job, and I go, well, it's not actually. Like, it's, you go on stage, whether you like it or not, you bare your soul and you come off feeling really vulnerable and really like a raw nerve and really exposed. And if you're getting sober at the same time, or trying not to drink, or whatever it is, it's excruciating. It is excruciating. So
you describe it so well, Ali, that rawness, and then having to absorb the opinions of others. It's so brutal.
And mainly the opinion of myself. Like, alcoholism, as I understand, is the disease that's in my mind. It's not in the alcohol. I have an alcoholic mind. So my mind tells me all kinds of crazy things. So whether I went out and played a good gig or not, I'm going to come off and be full of the shame and fear that I had when I was a little kid. And then when I found alcohol, I was like, woohoo, I never have to feel this again. And then at 23, I was like, my life's a mess. I can't use alcohol. And then I'm stuck with the same problem I had when I was a kid, you know? So, yeah.
That voice that we have, it's such a powerful thing. And a lot of people ask me when I got sober about peer pressure. And one of the things I often thought about was Sahara, actually, Sahara Shepherd, who joins us on Zoom.
My surname's Herald.
Sorry, Sahara Herald, I'm so sorry. Because she was so open about her sobriety, and I felt like, man, if she's like the queen of promoting, if she can be openly sober in this absolutely enabling environment, then goddamn it, I can. And most people in the music industry, if they've been around long enough, have at least touched hell. They might not have been there, but they've got their fingertips on it and got singed. So if you need to get sober, people understand. In your industry, people understand it's you that needs to give yourself permission and forgiveness. Now, we are so out of time, but I really want to just quickly tick off some institutional things that could change to help practitioners of the music industry stay sober at work. Like I said, we're out of time, so can we just get some top-line stuff? I'm going to start with you, Sahara.
Sure. Certainly having HR departments, etc., that are open to having those conversations with staff, that they feel it's a safe space, you know, to talk. But one of the things I did want to highlight that I did the Big Sound keynote in 2019, and during that speech actually launched the Temperance Bar, which was, going to be at Splendour in 2020. Didn't obviously happen, but that was going to be, a public space of, alcohol-free zone. Following from that, that speech, I've been doing a lot of work with Support Act as one of their mental health advocates. And one of the things that we'll be launching this year that we're in, is sober spaces backstage at festivals. So that's big. And, they have them at festivals in the US, they have meetings backstage at Coachella, 12-step meetings, which have literally not necessarily saved my life, but certainly saved me from shanking some of my colleagues. But it's difficult traveling with, a bunch of blokes in particular that are, all getting on it. And, I just end up being the designated driver sometimes. But anyway, but I think having those sober spaces within the work environment is so important, as we've discussed, a lot of those areas. And, the thing that's become really interesting for me over the past number of years is that more and more, every single artist that I work with, there is at least one or two sober people within their tour party. Not necessarily the artists themselves, but, the production manager, the lighting guy, etc. And I think because there's more transparency around those things, I'm now able, when I go on tour, I have a bit of a network, which maybe that was always there and I didn't realise, but it seems to me that it's there's more transparency around sobriety. And, I welcome those conversations. It's part of why I broke my own anonymity and, being vocal and public about this, is that it opens the door to other people to reach out to me and have that conversation.
Thank you, Sahara, Herald. Ali Barter, what sort of institutional systemic things could change?
I really like the idea of meetings at festivals and sober spaces, but also I like more conversation around how difficult it is to be a touring musician. Like, I often would find myself Googling things late at night alone in a hotel room, like famous band's worst gig, because I was like, I've just played the worst gig, I want to kill myself. And so I, just talking more, and having, sharing experiences, because I thought, that everyone walked off stage and felt brilliant about themselves all the time, and I was the only one who walked off stage and said, I don't know if I'm meant to be doing this. And so, so more conversations, more places to go for help,
Caleb?
I think people in positions not being scared to confront someone about it.
Wow.
I know for
that's
me,
big.
to dramatically cut down on my drinking, I'm not 100% sober now, but I drink far less than I ever have before, was because an artist actually tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, you've been drunk at our last 10 shows. What? We don't like it. And that made me think, shit, okay, I've got an issue and I've got to fix it. And since then, I've approached several people that I've known and said, hey, mate, I think it's time to get some help. And they've actually reacted really well to that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of fear in speaking to artists and stuff about the issue. And I think probably, that would be the main thing for me.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that, because often when I reflect on my own drinking, I long for someone to have said, bitch, pull your head in, and no one did. So I really, really value that. Peer-to-peer feedback like that is so brutal, but you absolutely listen. Dr. Jeff?
I just want to say that I don't think my womb contracted when I saw my first band, although I think my nipples were erect. Just want to, but thank you for that. Thank you for that, though. It was really, I went, yeah, and kind of no. But the themes that are emerging, I think, one is people are we need to see alcohol, the overuse of alcohol and drugs in the music industry as self-medication. People are self-medicating. So that if people are self-medicating, just because no one is helping them, we need systems that will help people understand who they are as creative practitioners, help them understand how to cope better with the stresses. So I'm with Ali on that, and I'm also with Caleb. There are people of influence like Sahara Herald who can form role models of informed ways of actually how to deal better with the stresses, which is a whole bunch of stuff about how you build personal resilience, how you develop better eating, exercise, and food habits, and sleeping habits. There's a whole range of stuff that is well known about how you develop resilience that needs to be embedded in the music industry. And then one little quick fix, I think, in the green rooms and at industry events, just the responsible service of alcohol. There's already legislation that covers the whole of the country. If that were in the green rooms, if we're on the two of us, if somebody was just made, there was an accountability issue. So I think always in these kind of complicated issues, it's a carrot and stick. Yeah. So the carrot is, let's get better. We can show you better ways of living with your highly creative brain. And don't you want to live long and prosper? There's another cultural reference. But if do you want a short career? Like, there are so many people who have sadly burnt out, broken, and taken their own lives. Alcohol and a non-prescription medication are a big part of that picture, right? Or do you want to do that? Do you want to die at 43? Or do you want to be able to live a long, productive life doing the work that you love and actually bringing joy to the human race, which is the function of the music industry, it's the function of what we do, right? It's the function of artists. So that's my thing. Let's teach people how to live better. But then the stick, responsible service of alcohol, somebody gets fined. Somebody has a license removed. Somebody gets whacked if there is clearly an abuse of alcohol that could have been prevented by simple protocols.
So much to think about, but of course, bringing joy to the human race. Could we please thank our speakers today, Sahara Herald, Ali Barter, Caleb Williams, and Dr. Jeffrey Crabtree.